I stared at the heavy brass doors of the Grand Savannah Hotel, the gold lettering of my own company name, Vance and Oak, gleaming under the marquee lights, while my mother planted her palms firmly against my chest and pushed me backward into the humid night air. She looked at my silk dress, the exact emerald shade we had chosen for the corporate branding, and then she looked past me, her eyes darting nervously toward the line of sleek black town cars pulling up to the curb. "You cannot be seen here tonight, Avery," she whispered, her voice low and sharp, cutting through the distant sound of a jazz quartet playing inside the ballroom. "This is Julian's moment, and having you lurking around with your technical grievances will ruin the narrative we built for the investors." I held the custom leather-bound archives of our original recipes in my hands, a book I had spent 3 weeks binding by hand as a gift for our 10th anniversary milestone, and watched her face remain entirely flat. There was no flicker of maternal warmth, no sudden wave of regret, just the cold calculation of a woman closing a vault door. I had signed every single raw ingredient supply chain contract for this nationwide expansion, every single warehouse lease from Georgia to Oregon under my personal Social Security number and my pristine corporate credit line. I had authorized the initial capital injections when our bank accounts were scraping bottom, yet here she was, erasing me from the foyer of my own creation. When she called me 48 hours later, it wasn't to offer an apology or ask if I had made it back to Seattle safely. She called because a critical automated manufacturing invoice for $92,000 had bounced, and the suppliers were threatening to halt the entire launch shipment if the primary guarantor didn't sign the immediate wire release. What I told her next was something her carefully curated world was completely unprepared for. To understand how a mother arrives at the point where she can physically bar her firstborn daughter from the celebration of her life's work, you have to look at the quiet math of the Vance family dynamics. For 10 years, I lived in the shadow of a grand illusion, operating as the invisible engine of a culinary brand that my younger brother Julian wore like a tailored suit. Julian was 28, charming, effortlessly handsome, and possessed the unique ability to speak in glittering generalities that made wealthy people open their checkbooks. He was the face of Vance and Oak, the visionary culinary prodigy celebrated in regional lifestyle magazines, while I was the person who sat in windowless offices at 2 a.m, calculating profit margins, managing heavy equipment depreciations, and refining the artisanal fermentation formulas that gave our products their signature taste. Our mother, Eleanor, had spent her entire life engineering Julian's ascent, treating him like a fragile piece of fine china while viewing me as the iron scaffolding designed to hold him up. The cracks became impossible to ignore last winter when the luxury hospitality conglomerate, Apex Resorts, offered a multi-million-dollar partnership to place Vance and Oak products in every one of their boutique properties across the country. It was the kind of deal that transforms a regional boutique operation into a legacy brand overnight. I remember sitting in my office in Seattle, watching the rain beat against the glass, while Julian phoned me from a high-end restaurant in Atlanta, his voice thick with expensive bourbon. "We did it, Avery," he had laughed, the background noise of clinking crystal echoing through the receiver. "The contract is moving to the final stage, and Apex wants a massive showcase gala in Savannah to announce the rollout." I felt a profound sense of validation wash over me, a belief that the decade of 90-hour work weeks and sacrificed personal relationships had finally yielded something permanent. I told him I would book my flight to Savannah immediately, but when Eleanor joined the call from her extension, her voice instantly lowered the temperature in the room. "There is no need to rush into expensive cross-country travel just yet, Avery," she had said, her tone dripping with a practiced administrative sweetness. "The guest list is incredibly tight, mostly high-level venture capitalists and brand ambassadors who expect a very specific aesthetic. You have so much data entry and compliance paperwork to finalize from your end in Seattle to ensure the contracts clear escrow, so it is probably best if you remain focused on the infrastructure while Julian handles the social execution." I brushed the comment off at the time, convincing myself that Eleanor was simply managing the logistical stress of a major corporate transition. I was the older sister, the pragmatic caretaker, the one who would spend her 20s transferring money from her personal savings account into the company payroll account whenever our distribution channels stalled. When I was 26, I had taken out a secondary personal loan to fund the automated bottling line that saved our first major grocery contract, an obligation that took me 4 years of disciplined budgeting to clear from my record. 2 weeks after that initial call, Eleanor phoned me back, her tone shifting to that urgent, breathless cadence she always utilized whenever the family required a financial shield. Avery, the manufacturing facility in Savannah, is demanding a signed personal guarantee for the automated production run of the Apex launch inventory, she said, the sound of her shuffling papers coming through the line. The bank won't accept Julian's signature because of his previous vehicle lease defaults, and your father's credit history has been completely shot since the real estate restructuring. It is just a standard formality to get the machinery spinning for the launch, a temporary signature on 4 corporate indemnity forms. You would be doing your brother an immense favor to get this over the finish line. The total liability summarized in those documents was staggering, representing tens of thousands of dollars in raw ingredient allocations, glass manufacturing commitments, and specialized cold storage logistics, all tied directly to my personal credit profile. I questioned the exposure, pointing out that if the Apex rollout experienced even a minor distribution delay, the financial fallout would land entirely on my shoulders. Eleanor had sighed, a heavy, theatrical sound that carried the weight of decades of emotional manipulation. This isn't about personal exposure, Avery. This is about family solidarity, she insisted. It is just your name on the internal administrative paperwork, and the corporate revenue from the Apex advance will cover the balances long before the invoices mature. I trust you won't let your brother's entire future collapse over a routine signature. I signed the documents that evening, sitting alone at my kitchen table, telling myself that this was what foundational partnership required, completely blind to the fact that I was actively building the trap door my family was about to drop me through. As the weeks ticked down toward the grand showcase gala, my exclusion from the corporate inner circle became systemic. A company-wide digital workspace was created for the event coordination, filled with layout designs, press release drafts, and media kits, but my access credentials were never authorized. When Julian accidentally copied me on an email thread containing the final layout for the regional business journals, I saw the full-page spread featuring a sleek photograph of Eleanor and Julian standing in our flagship facility. The headline read, "Julian Vance, the singular visionary redefining Southern culinary tradition." My name did not appear anywhere in the 3-page article, not even in the fine print acknowledgments of the operational development. I called Julian twice to ask why our founding history had been edited so aggressively, but my calls were rerouted to a junior public relations assistant who informed me that the media strategy required a streamlined, individual focus to appeal to the primary investors. When I reached out to Eleanor, she dismissed my concerns with a chilling indifference, stating that everything was being handled according to professional counsel and that I should focus on my work rather than letting my personal vanity interfere with the corporate narrative. 10 days before the event, the official digital press kit was published online. It featured a beautifully produced documentary short detailing the origins of Vance & Helk, showcasing the early recipe experimentation and the original kitchen spaces where the brand was born. The video utilized archival footage that I had filmed myself, but the narrative voiceover credited Julian with every single intellectual property breakthrough, every flavor profile development, and every strategic distribution victory. The caption below the video read, "The Vance Family, a legacy of united excellence." I stared at the screen for an hour, watching my own life's work being repackaged as another person's innate genius, feeling a cold knot of realization tighten in my gut. They hadn't omitted me by accident or out of logistical oversight. They had systematically erased my existence from the public record to ensure that Julian appeared as an unencumbered, brilliant solo entrepreneur to the corporate executives at Apex Resorts. I didn't call to argue. I packed my bag, put on my finest attire, and boarded an overnight flight from Seattle to Savannah, determined to stand in that ballroom as the co-founder and primary shareholder I legally was. The travel cost me nearly $2,000 out of pocket, funds I drew from my personal checking account because my corporate card access had been mysteriously restricted to maintenance expenses earlier that week. When I arrived at the Grand Savannah Hotel, the air was heavy with coastal moisture and the scent of expensive floral arrangements lining the entrance. I watched from the edge of the terrace as prominent local politicians, national food distributors, and elite corporate executives stepped out of their vehicles, greeted by hostesses wearing the Vance and Oak signature colors. When I reached the primary check-in kiosk, the young clerk scanned the digital registry twice, her brow furrowing as her finger traced the lines of approved names. "I'm sorry, ma'am," she said, her voice polite but unyielding. "I don't see an Avery Vance listed anywhere on the VIP entry log or the corporate executive roster for this evening." Before I could answer, the heavy double doors opened and Eleanor stepped into the foyer, resplendent in a champagne satin gown that looked like it cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. Her hair was perfectly sculpted, her jewelry catching the amber glow of the chandeliers, but her jaw turned to granite the moment her eyes locked onto mine. She stepped between me and the registration desk, her movements swift and defensive, creating a physical barrier between her firstborn daughter and the elite crowd mingling just 20 feet away. "Avery, what on earth are you doing here?" she hissed, her voice a sharp, venomous whisper that barely carried over the ambient music. "I told you your presence wasn't required for this phase of the launch." I looked at her, my voice trembling but clear. "I am the co-founder of this company, Mom. I formulated every sauce in that room. I signed the manufacturing guarantees that allowed those bottles to be filled, and I am going to walk into that ballroom and take my place on the stage." Eleanor stepped closer, her perfume filling the space between us, a scent that had always signaled comfort during my childhood, but now felt like dry ice. "Only the public-facing family is allowed inside tonight, Avery," she whispered, her eyes completely devoid of warmth. "You weren't invited to this presentation because you don't fit the brand identity we sold to Apex. They believe Julian is the sole creative force, supported by a traditional, unified estate. Having an estranged technical co-founder from the Pacific Northwest showing up to demand recognition ruins the entire marketing architecture. You need to turn around and leave before you cause an embarrassing scene that ruins your brother's career." As she spoke, my father, Harrison, appeared in the doorway behind her, holding a glass of sparkling wine, his eyes widening as he caught sight of me. He took a half step forward, his mouth opening as if to speak my name, but Eleanor shot him a single, freezing glance over her shoulder. Harrison's shoulders sank instantly, his gaze dropping to the polished marble floor as he tucked his free hand into his tuxedo pocket and retreated into the warmth of the crowd without uttering a single word of defense. The betrayal was absolute, a coordinated domestic eviction staged under the guise of corporate necessity. From behind the satin curtains, a sophisticated woman's voice broke the silence, clear and authoritative. "Eleanor, darling, is everything all right out here?" The corporate representative from Apex Resorts, Victoria Vance Caldwell, stepped into the foyer, her sharp eyes instantly analyzing the tension in the room. Eleanor turned on a dime, her face instantly melting into a warm, aristocratic smile as she addressed the corporate executive. "Oh, Victoria, everything is absolutely wonderful," Eleanor chimed, her voice dripping with artificial hospitality. "This is just a distant operational consultant who flew in with some outdated layout designs. She was just leaving to handle some administrative updates at the local printing office." Victoria looked at me, her gaze lingering on my emerald dress and the custom leather-bound recipe archive I held tightly against my side. "I see," Victoria murmured slowly, her professional radar clearly picking up the dissonance. "Well, the Apex board is seating themselves now, Eleanor, and we need the family on the dais for the opening remarks in 5 minutes." Eleanor nodded enthusiastically, reaching out to touch Victoria's arm as they walked back into the ballroom together, leaving the heavy doors to swing shut in my face. I stood alone in the empty foyer, the sound of applause echoing from the other side of the wall as Julian was announced to the stage. I walked out of the hotel, my heels clicking against the concrete, and sat in my rental car at the far end of the darkened parking lot. I didn't shout, I didn't smash the windows, and I didn't force my way back inside to make the scene they were so terrified of. I sat in the silence of that vehicle and let the tears fall, a quiet, shuddering release of a decade's worth of unrequited loyalty. I could hear the muffled bass of the celebration music vibrating through the night air, a party funded entirely by my credit score and built upon my stolen intelligence, celebrating a family that had just classified me as a distant contractor to a room full of strangers. By Monday morning, I had returned to my apartment in Seattle, the gray northern sky providing a grim, comforting contrast to the artificial warmth of Savannah. I sat at my desk, booted up my laptop, and began a meticulous audit of every single legal instrument I had executed over the past year. The documentation was clear and unforgiving. As the primary guarantor on the specialized logistics and raw ingredient supply agreements, I held the absolute legal authority to revoke my personal guarantee and remove my authorized credit accounts from all outstanding invoices associated with the Vance & Oak launch distribution. I am requesting that the current $92,000 balance be directed entirely to the primary corporate officers listed in Savannah, Eleanor and Julian Vance, effective immediately. There was a brief silence on the line as the operations director verified the contract parameters. "Understood, Miss Vance," he replied, his tone shifting to a purely transactional neutrality. "Since your individual signature is the sole financial pillar holding this credit line open, the revocation means the system will automatically freeze the automated shipment release until a new guarantor provides certified funding. The invoices will be forwarded to the Savannah office within the hour." The dominoes began to fall precisely 40 minutes later. My phone buzzed on the desk, Eleanor's name flashing across the screen with an aggressive insistence. I let it ring to the final second before answering, placing the call on speakerphone as I leaned back in my chair. "Avery, what exactly do you think you are doing?" Eleanor erupted, her voice stripped of every ounce of its carefully cultivated southern grace, replaced with a raw, panicked screech. "The logistics company just issued a hard freeze on our entire national launch shipment. They are stating that our credit line has been terminated due to a lack of a valid personal guarantee. The launch at the Apex properties is supposed to go live in 72 hours. Have you completely lost your mind?" I listened to her breath catch, my own heart rate remaining perfectly calm. "I didn't lose my mind, Mom," I responded, my voice matching the cool, administrative tone she had used against me in the hotel foyer. "I simply cleaned up the corporate records. Since you informed the investors and the public that I am merely a distant operational consultant who doesn't fit the family identity, it is completely inappropriate for my personal credit score and my financial safety to be used to fund your national rollout. A distant consultant doesn't carry a $92,000 liability for people who claim she doesn't exist. The family's grand expansion is now the family's financial responsibility." "You are being vindictive and incredibly childish," Eleanor shouted, the sound of her pacing across her hardwood office floor audible through the line.
Your brother has worked himself to the bone to secure this apex partnership. If the inventory isn't delivered to their boutique properties by Thursday morning, they will void the entire contract for breach of distribution terms. You are going to bankrupt this entire family over a minor social misunderstanding at a private party. Your father is so stressed his chest is tight, Avery. If he ends up in the emergency room because of your selfish behavior, that blood will be entirely on your hands. I didn't flinch at the mention of my father's health, a guilt mechanism she had deployed like a heat-seeking missile every time I tried to establish a boundary since my college years. Dad's health is a matter for his personal physician, I said, my voice steady and unyielding, and if his chest is tight, perhaps he should reflect on why he stood in that doorway and watched his eldest daughter be thrown into the street like a trespasser without opening his mouth. I am no longer accepting invoices for an estate that erases me from the ledger. Enjoy your lunch, Mom. I hung up the phone and turned it face down on the desk. By Wednesday afternoon, the family phone tree had been fully mobilized, each branch attempting to breach my perimeter with varying degrees of emotional warfare. Julian called next, his voice lacking his usual charismatic bravado, reduced to a desperate, petulant whine. Avery, please, you have to fix this, he pleaded, the sound of traffic in the background suggesting he was driving between emergency meetings with local lenders. Apex is already asking why the freight tracking numbers haven't populated in their system. Garrett Caldwell, Victoria's co-director, is calling our office every hour. We don't have $92,000 in liquid capital to clear the logistics freeze, and no local bank will approve an emergency corporate loan without an asset audit that takes 3 weeks. You are destroying my life's work before it even leaves the warehouse. Your life's work, Julian? I mused, a cold smile touching my lips. Interesting phrase, considering every single formula in those bottles was developed by my hands while you were playing golf with venture capitalists. Did you know that Mom told the Apex executives I was just a temporary printing contractor? Did you know she physically barred me from the ballroom while you were taking a standing ovation for my recipes? Julian paused, a long, telling silence stretching across the line that confirmed everything I needed to know. I mean, Mom said it was vital for the investment narrative, Avery, he muttered, his voice dropping to a defensive mutter. The board wanted a specific, streamlined image of a singular culinary artisan. It wasn't personal, it was just business strategy. You were always the analytical one, so we figured you would understand that the optics required a certain presentation. Optics require realism, Julian, I replied. And the current reality is that your singular creative genius needs to find a way to conjure $92,000 out of thin air before Thursday morning. Good luck with your presentation. I ended the call before he could launch into another round of frantic rationalizations, feeling a profound sense of liberation with every second of silence that followed. The true turning point occurred on Thursday morning, the exact deadline for the freight release. My great-aunt Clara, Eleanor's older sister and a retired appellate judge who had spent 40 years dismantling corporate fraud cases, called me from her home in Savannah. Clara was the undisputed matriarch of the extended family, a woman who viewed Eleanor's social engineering with a profound, unadulterated contempt. Avery, I sat at a luncheon with Victoria Vance Caldwell yesterday afternoon, Clara informed me, her sharp, rhythmic voice cracking with an unmistakable note of strategic satisfaction. Victoria mentioned that the Vance and Oak expansion was experiencing a mysterious administrative delay, and she seemed highly suspicious of your mother's sudden evasion when asked about the company's structural governance. So I decided it was time to provide the Apex board with an accurate corporate history. I leaned forward, my fingers gripping the edge of my desk. What did you do, Aunt Clara? I told her the absolute truth, Avery, Clara stated flatly. I informed Victoria that the woman she met in the foyer wasn't a distant printing contractor, but the literal architect of the entire brand, the majority shareholder who holds the legal title to every formulation they are planning to sell across their network. I explained that Eleanor had locked you out of the gala to hide the fact that they were exploiting your personal credit lines while erasing your corporate equity. I also let her know that you had pulled your financial guarantees, meaning the entire logistics chain was currently frozen due to your family's lack of capital liquidity. The fallout from Clara's intervention was immediate and devastating to Eleanor's carefully constructed house of cards. Within 2 hours of Clara's call, the Apex legal team issued a formal demand for an immediate emergency audit of Vance & Oak's corporate structure, stating that any misrepresentation of intellectual property ownership or operational leadership constituted an immediate material breach of their partnership agreement. The multi-million-dollar rollout was suspended indefinitely, pending a face-to-face resolution of the governance dispute. To save the company from immediate bankruptcy and prevent Apex from walking away entirely, Eleanor and Julian were forced to take out a high-interest personal hard money loan against their own residential properties to clear the $92,000 manufacturing debt and satisfy the logistics suppliers. The fairy tale expansion they had celebrated so loudly at the hotel ballroom was now anchored to a crushing monthly debt service that devoured their operational profit margins before a single bottle of sauce ever hit an Apex resort shelf. The image of the effortless elite culinary dynasty vanished overnight, replaced by the grim reality of 2 desperate operators working around the clock to service a massive financial liability they had brought entirely upon themselves.
On Friday morning, I sat at my computer and drafted a final formal communication to the Savannah office, copying our corporate legal counsel to ensure the boundary was written in stone. Eleanor, Harrison, and Julian, I wrote, my fingers moving across the keyboard with a calm, deliberate precision. This email serves as formal notice that I am resigning from my operational duties with Vance & Oak, effective immediately. My shares in the company will be placed into a blind trust, and any future distribution of corporate dividends or restructuring proposals will be handled exclusively through my legal representatives. Do not contact my personal phone or email regarding financial emergencies, supply chain management, or family obligations. If any member of this family desires a relationship with me moving forward, that conversation will begin with an authentic, public acknowledgement of the truth of our history, not an invoice or a request for a guarantee. Avery. I hit send, closed the laptop, and stood up to look out my window at the Seattle skyline. For the first time in my entire adult life, the crushing weight of over-responsibility, the constant suffocating anxiety of trying to perform well enough to earn the love of people who viewed me as an asset rather than a daughter, evaporated entirely. I didn't write that email to punish them or to enact a cinematic revenge. I wrote it to preserve the remaining pieces of my own soul. A boundary isn't a weapon designed to destroy the people who hurt you. It is simply a line on a map that shows where your willingness to absorb their poison ends. 6 months have passed since that humid night outside the Grand Savannah Hotel. I recently received a major promotion at the software logistics firm I joined in Seattle, stepping into a senior director role that recognizes strategic leadership under high-pressure conditions. My father sent me a brief, handwritten letter 2 weeks ago, the first piece of direct communication he has initiated in years. The ink was slightly unsteady, but the words were real. "Avery, I am deeply sorry for my silence at the hotel doors," he wrote, his message lacking any of Eleanor's frantic excuses. I was a coward who chose the path of least resistance because I was terrified of the storm your mother would create. I should have walked you into that ballroom myself. I will carry that failure for the rest of my days." I read his letter twice, tucked it into my desk drawer, and sent a brief, polite response, leaving the door open exactly an inch, not wide enough to let the old patterns return, but unlocked if he ever chooses to walk toward the truth alone. Julian and Eleanor are still drowning in the monthly payments of the emergency loan they took out to clear the logistics freeze. The Apex partnership eventually moved forward, but under highly restrictive conditions that stripped Julian of his unilateral decision-making authority, placing an independent corporate manager in charge of their daily operations. The grand illusion of the Vance dynasty has crumbled into a routine, stress-filled job where they are forced to confront the financial reality of the daughter they tried to erase with every check they write to their lenders. I didn't lose my family on that gravel terrace in Savannah. I simply stopped paying a seat at a table that was built without a chair for me, and in doing so, I finally found my way home.